Thank you for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz. I'm attempting to do the program Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as I launch this great experiment in talk radio, in that I'm doing a program entirely online, and yet one that has many of the features of a conventional radio program, where I am able to take phone calls and you will be heard. The number to call, if you'd like to join, 617-396-4958. That number again, 617-396-4958. And of course, you're welcome to chat on TicTock, where we're also live. And I'll try to respond to those as long as they're within the parameters of community standards, of course. And the program is live on YouTube, on Twitch, let's see, Twitch, DLive, Facebook, LinkedIn, VK, Pocaro, and of course, Twitter, apparently. So, you know, I'm attempting to build a live, interactive, real community where we can discuss issues relatively uncensored and do so on a regular basis. So if you'd like to join the program, please come on down. We can talk about any issues you'd like in the news. 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. I am in the midst of writing my fifth, what I call my pandemic books. It has nothing to do with the pandemic directly, but during the height of the pandemic, I started writing these short books. By short, I mean 20 to 25,000 words. They're more than a pamphlet, but they're not quite a book. And I'm disciplining myself to write one every 3 months. I had a bit of a lull, but I am finishing my fifth one. And I thought I'd have it ready by maybe a week or two before Christmas, but it's moved forward so quickly that I hope to have it done before Thanksgiving. And even, I don't know, maybe in a week or two. It's like just rolling off the press like that. It's amazing how you can write a book now. The topic is a conservative theory of sociology. I am a sociology student at Bunker Hill Community College, where I will be getting an associate's degree in sociology. And so here I am, an old guy taking courses into college and learning about sociology. And it's not surprising that all of the sociological theories that I've seen tend to be from a left liberal perspective. And indeed, the whole science seems to be oriented toward the left. I think it was founded as a tool of the left, quite frankly, in the 19th century by Auguste Comte, who was very much part of the kind of progressive Marxist movement of the mid-19th century. And my contention is that there are so many different schools of thought and different political theories around sociology, all liberal, that there ought to be a conservative school of sociology, as if only as an alternative, but more because conservatism, I argue in my theory, and in my social theory, in and of itself, lends itself to sociology, which is an examination of societies and of society as a whole, because conservatism is natural, conservatism is normal, conservatism is who we are at the end of the day, because conservatism is not an ideology. Conservatism is simply an examination of that which is. It's our way of life, and an emphasis on the more positive elements of that which is, the more progressive elements, to the real meaning of the word progressive. And that I counter that with the left, which is artificial, which is not natural, which is not normal, but which attempts to change society, and even in the more broad sense, human nature itself, and even reality, to suit an agenda. And at its core, ultimately, that agenda is a collectivized world, a world where we give up institutions and ideas that make us different, that make us, if you will, unequal. And those institutions include things as simple as basic faith, what Karl Marx called the opiate of the masses, family, love, commitment, sacredness, loyalty, politically speaking, the nation state, subsidiarity, trade between nations, the right to free trade, monetary policy that where you have money, period, but also money that reflects the value of an economy. All of these things are normal and unnatural, and all of these things, the liberal left experiment is attempting to overthrow. Now, that doesn't mean that they are consciously trying to do that. I'm talking more philosophically here. I'm using what C. Wright Mills called the sociological imagination to open the lens and take a look at the underlying beliefs that are involved there. That they believe in absolute equality, which means the removal of any political or social institution or idea that fosters inequality. And the ultimate result of this sort of de facto equality is a one world ant colony, where we basically ultimately have to give up our own personal identity, our own sense of individuality, our own minds. Everyone is fused into one gigantic cosmic brain, if you will. Everyone becomes an automaton. Alleged to Marx's way of thinking, this would be a condition by which we would be at peace with nature. He talked about the nation state withering away. He viewed progress as using the powers, the earthly powers of the nation state to transform man in that direction. And my contention is that that's not natural. It's not normal. It removes things that are not, as Marx said, false forms of false consciousness. As the grand conspiracy theory of the left was that the bourgeoisie engaged in a conspiracy of exploitation against the proletariat, in which case they would invent these institutions, that these institutions were forms of false consciousness that were put in place to deceive and rip off working people, because all value, all currency, all production comes from the laborer, not anywhere else. And thus any attempt to try to profit from labor involves a conspiracy. And this is the underlying conspiracy of the left. This is when you hear them talk about, like people like Elizabeth Warren, talk about the millionaires and the billionaires. Or when you hear an average liberal who has internalized some of these ideas and is not necessarily conscious of them, but that they basically make up the warp and woof of their realities. When they talk about, corporate greed, they're not talking about any specific corporation that may be greedy, and there certainly are. They're talking about the very existence of people coming together to make a profit, that this in and of itself is greedy. This is part of the manifestation of this false theory. So to bring things back here, my goal, am I Turkish? No. To bring things back here, the conservative sociological social theory that I'm developing presents what I would say is a non-ideology. That conservatism is not an ideology, it is what exists. It is the better aspect of human nature, and that to embrace a conservative idea would be to engage in genuine progress, because it opens up the human being and gets human beings together naturally with other human beings in order to improve humanity, in order to invent things, in order to advance life. And so that's in a nutshell my conservative social theory. And the book is hopefully going to be published by Thanksgiving. Watch for it. It's going to be called Sociology for Conservatives by yours truly, Charles Moscowitz. Anyway, let me give out the phone number. I want to get into a few issues here, and I want to do it with delicacy because this is YouTube and we have to be careful. 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958. I have someone saying to me, that's an opinion, not facts. Yes, it's an opinion. It's, you cannot, you can have an opinion, you cannot make up facts. You can only, my opinion is argued what I would contend, based upon what I contend are observable facts. And I derive my opinion not out of whole cloth. My opinion, for example, on, I'll give some examples. The conservative social theory respects the concept of private property, right? Now, private property is not something that was simply made up by ruling elites, as the left would like to contend, as Marx contended when he referred to property as a part of false consciousness. Rather, private property exists in nature. It's observable. We can put aside the obvious and documentable fact that private property is something that benefits people. It benefits men and women who are trying to function as free citizens and who need various modalities to protect and preserve their freedom and their capital and their assets as they live their life. And not to mention the fact that private property is one of the most basic, if not the most basic reason why human beings establish governments that are there to protect private property, including abstract property like intellectual property. But that private property as a concept is observable in nature. Animals understand private property. Plants understand private property. And they compete for property and do so naturally. Try to interrupt a dog. A dog understands a dog's property is the area around it. If you impinge upon that property, you might get bitten, right? Try to interrupt the property of a bird's nest. You might get pecked at. Try to interrupt the property of a beaver's dam. Animals understand property. It exists in nature. It's science, if you will. It's more than political science. And so property is one of the cornerstones of the conservative idea. And it's an example, which I could give many, of why I say that conservatism is not an ideology. Conservatism is an observation of nature. It is what exists. And we can derive from that the better elements of our nature using reason, using consciousness, using a moral and ethical code, which I believe comes from an irrefutable source outside of us. It's not invented by us. That source I call God, others may not. And that we then learn from that code over time, and we build societies that not only recognize that which is normal and that which is natural, but in the abstract sense, we recognize that which is good, that which is right, that which is proper in terms of relationships, in terms of who we are as characters, in terms of how we relate to our fellow human beings, and how our nations relate to each other. This is what conservatism is, and it's based upon axioms of identifiable truth. Okay, 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. You're welcome to join the program. I'm getting a lot of chat here from TicTock, but if you're watching on YouTube, you're welcome to call in and join the program. All right, I want to get into a few issues. First of all, I want to note the passing of former Secretary of State Colin Powell, who passed away this morning, or passed away yesterday, of COVID-19. Now, you know, my condolences to his family. I think he was a great American. I don't agree with some of his policies. I certainly did not agree with getting into the Iraq War, but he was a great man and he was a great American and certainly entitled to his opinions. And I think that he was, on the whole, one of the better public figures. I think that it's interesting, and I'm not going to comment further, that his website, that his announcement, which was put out on Facebook, states that he was fully vaccinated, and yet he still caught the disease, suffered from the disease, and died from the disease. I don't really want to say more about that because these subjects are forbidden on YouTube. I will simply mention that because that's what his press release says. You can draw your own conclusions about this. You can do your own research. He was fully vaxxed according to his own press release on his Facebook page, and yet he died of the disease. I don't think we need to say more other than to do your research. I'm not anti-vax. I've been fully vaccinated myself. But I think that we need to, whenever we're dealing with any kind of medical modality, we need to have the freedom to choose, and we need to have the right to investigate fully all sides, because it's our lives, and it should be our lives and our freedom in terms of what we decide to do. And I think that I think I'm operating on safe grounds when I note that one of the main arguments by those who want to enforce vaccinations is that people who get the vaccination are not going to spread the disease, and that they are not going to die, except in very rare situations. All I can say is that this is something that is open to reasonable probity and debate by people who know what they're talking about. And there are a lot of them out there who are trying to do that. They are being censored for reasons that I don't totally understand. I could speculate about, but I think I'll refrain. And I'll also just note before I move on to another subject, because I don't want to go too far here, that it is interesting to me that alternative therapeutic medicines, which can be used and are being used all over the world right now in the early stages of the COVID virus, if you catch it, and which have proven to be effective in many, if not most cases, that we are not only not using them in this country, or we're using them in a very limited capacity. And even to the extent where the big drugstores won't even fill a prescription for these drugs, but that we're not allowed to talk about it. I can't mention it. If I do, TikTok and YouTube will take me down, so I'm not going to mention it, other than to simply express the opinion. And I'm not a doctor, and I'm not recommending anything here. But that evidence, if you look at the rest of the world, indicates that therapeutic drugs are being used, and some natural drugs are also being used very effectively against the virus. And we need to ask ourselves why in this country, and I think it's only this country, I could be mistaken about that, we are not only not using these therapeutic drugs, but we are forbidden to talk about it. Let's just leave that right there, and you can think about it. All right. Now I'm going to get into another verboten subject, and I'm going to do so with care, because again, I don't want to get banned on YouTube and TikTok. But before I do, let me give out the phone number. You're welcome to call in the program if you are so inclined. Please keep it based on community standards if you do. Otherwise, I'm going to have to hang up. 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. The Gateway Pundit has a really good article up today. Democrats reveal big clue in the past election. I'm not going to even read the title because I could get in trouble. They claim that it's a possibility that there may have been some tampering with votes from low-income voters in the battleground states. And they're calling for canvassing, all right? Now, this isn't me saying this. I'm trying to edit a little bit here because I don't want to get in trouble. What I can say are certain things that this article brings up that are, I don't think, controversial for YouTube and TikTok, so I'm going to read that. The 2020 election, President Trump won more votes than any sitting president in the history of the United States. He got something like 75 million votes. He increased his margin among women, among African Americans, among Hispanics, among gay people, among Jews, across the board, okay, by substantial numbers. He also increased his margin in every county. He practically won every county. And in the certain big cities, I will particularly mention my own home city of Boston, and New York, and Los Angeles, and Chicago. Now, these are big liberal centers. Trump increased his margins in all of those cities. The only cities where he did not increase his margin in this country were Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, Phoenix, and Detroit, and Milwaukee. Now, all I can say is that those cities, all of a sudden, you had Biden winning by ridiculously large numbers, like 98%, 97% in some precincts. Some precincts he even won by over 100%. All right. Why is it that only in those select cities Biden suddenly blasted out he did better than Obama did, better than Hillary did? This is somebody who sat in the basement the whole time. I mean, everywhere else in the country he didn't do better. Why was it there, only there? Anyways, it says that Biden got a record low number of counties in the United States, only 16%. But yet somehow the Democrat Joe Biden, who did not campaign and can barely string two sentences together, supposedly won 81 million votes. Now, anyone who watched that campaign can see that there was really no enthusiasm for Biden. He barely campaigned. He barely left his basement. Now, every 4 years, I like to go up to New Hampshire to see my neighboring state, what the primary looks like. I can always tell kind of who's winning and who's losing by the sort of the campaign office, the level of enthusiasm, the street talk. And I remember, for example, in 1992, I was up there, and that was the year Bill Clinton won. And I remember you could tell he was going to win. He had more money than anyone else. His office was very slick. He was giving out nice swag. People were enthusiastic. You could just see that he was winning. And at that time, not too many people knew who Bill Clinton was. And I remember at the time I walked around just to be provocative with a Jerry Brown button, just to get a little conversation out of people. And when I walked into the Clinton office, the first thing they said to me was, after Jerry Brown loses, are you going to support Clinton? I mean, they were just very confident, and I could tell that Clinton was going somewhere. Well, this last election, the only Democrat who generated even a slight amount of enthusiasm was Andrew Wang. And he had like younger people. Yet people, Asians, minorities, different people were like buzzing around his campaign office, and there was some excitement around him, but everyone else was as flat as a pancake. And Biden didn't even have an office in Manchester, Manchester being the main city in New Hampshire. Now, at the same time, President Trump had a rally. President Trump showed up at the arena, and it was packed. He sucked all the energy out of the whole state. And the Trump supporters were an interesting cross-section of people. I spent a little time there. I didn't go into the rally, but I watched the crowd. I kind of hung around. And, a lot of these people are, in a way, I suppose, like me, a little rough around the edges, sort of, working type people, blue collar. They're not the fashionable, people who speak with a phony British accent and who sound like they're intellectuals, And yet you also had a surprisingly large number of minorities and of working poor people and blue collar people, and smattering of intellectuals and upper class, but mostly average working people like myself. And their enthusiasm was through the roof. I think that that's pretty much a snapshot, even though I will acknowledge anecdotal, of the entire campaign. So, it just, the whole thing has a very strange aura to it. And now, of course, we're not allowed to talk about this, which is, I have to use euphemisms and indirection. And that says volumes. But what I'd say is that the whole thing stinks. I mean, there's something about it. The fact that the pandemic was used as an excuse by states, not Massachusetts, by the way, but certainly the battleground states, to mail out hundreds of thousands of unsolicited ballots. People didn't ask for them. Now, again, I'm going to be a little bit euphemistic here. I have to be careful. But there have been findings in a certain forensic audit which has taken place. I'm not going to mention what and where many tens of thousands of ballots apparently went out to parking lots, one ballot, 10 ballots to one person, ballots to out-of-state people, ballots to unregistered people. All right, I'm not going to say more. This same situation uncovered many, many ballots that were legitimate and where people did vote, and it was not registered. I wonder why. All right. Need I say more? The point is that we are told that the election was perfect, was pristine. You had this guy, Krebs, the head of cybersecurity, march out the day or two after and announce that this was the most pristine election in American history. He had no evidence for that. He had ignored calls from elected officials in Michigan and in Wisconsin who were asking him to investigate certain things. Didn't do it. Just came out and made this announcement. What I would suggest, and I'm not going to go any further here because I don't want to get in trouble. I'm hoping that they don't take me down even for already what I've said. What I would suggest, however, and I'm going to probably sign off soon, unless you want to call in. What I would suggest is that because polls that have been taken consistently from the day of the election, when you had all this strange stuff going on and you had all these states shut down simultaneously with Trump ahead, and then suddenly they start up again when you find out that Trump is no longer ahead. And all these reports of white vans showing up with votes and people counting who might have been receiving money from a certain multi-billionaire and other stuff, that the Republicans consistently, from that time until recently, according to legitimate polls, 60% average believe that there were improprieties, let's just put it that way. And those same polls indicate that an average of 25 to 30% of Democrats believe there were improprieties, and that increasing numbers of independents believe that there were improprieties. Given all of that, and that juxtaposed with this claim that this was the most pristine election in American history, would it not therefore make perfect sense for at least the battleground states, if not every state, to undergo a full forensic audit, to undergo canvassing, which is something, by the way, that has happened regularly in elections going back many, many decades, probably back a century. All that means is that people go out and they just simply determine the point of custody of the ballot. They contact someone, did you vote, yes or no? And they just answer. And if the answer, and they find a ballot and they trace it back, and they find out whether or not the ballots were valid, whether or not they really were the ballot of a person who did vote. They don't ask how they voted. They don't ask who they voted for, what they were registered for, just simply did they vote, yes or no. And by this means, we can find out whether or not these votes were legitimate. And the same thing with the audit. We can take a look at the actual ballots. That way we can put this whole thing to sleep. And if in fact this was a great and pristine election, then you shouldn't worry about it. It'll prove it. It'll legitimate it. It will end this sort of rancor that you're so upset about. We should just do this for, the purpose of ensuring that there's no voter suppression to a high degree. What is voter suppression? Voter suppression happens when a real vote by a registered voter is suppressed by a false vote, a vote that was cast unlawfully, that was cast by an unregistered voter or a phantom voter. That suppresses the real vote. That is voter suppression in the literal sense. So in the name of voter suppression and stopping it, we ought to have full forensic audits, frankly, in all 50 states. And we ought to have canvassing in all 50 states. I don't care how much money it costs. The Democrats want to spend $3.5 trillion this year. Probably they'll come back for another one next year. To give to who? For climate change? I don't think so. Infrastructure? Not really. Maybe a small piece. No, it's not. It's to give to their friends. It's to give to their corrupt liberal groups. Green New Deal? Probably about 10% of it's going to go to the environment. The rest of it goes to advocacy groups and hacks who are going to suck off the public teat, frankly, and get rich and get more powerful. So if they can do that, they can spend a little bit of money on these forensic audits to ensure that our vote is sacred and that we have in this country, we are upholding the tradition of one man and one woman, one vote. Nothing more and nothing less. They should get behind this. We should all support this because we want that, because we want to stop voter suppression, and yet they are doing everything they can to stop this. They have swarms of lawyers going into the so-called battleground states where there are calls for audits. They're obfuscating, they're dribbling the ball, they're trying to keep it from happening. Why? That's all I ask. Just ask them why and make them answer, because we as an American people deserve to have this audit. Because there is nothing more important, there is nothing more sacred in a secular society than the sacredness of the vote. We have to preserve it. I don't care where it goes. And if in fact this election was so pristine, fine, I'll accept that. But we need to know. And the only way to get to the truth is to stop the demagoguery and stop the politics and get to the truth, get these audits done so we can then know, and we will have a stronger country for that. I'm not saying there's going to be any conclusions. I'm not calling for any changes in office holders. That's not even the point. I just want the truth, and we can handle the truth, to use the saying from A Few Good Men. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up on that note. I want to thank you for watching. Charles Moscowitz. Check out my books. They're available at Amazon Books. My latest book is The Satanic Conspiracy. It's doing very well. It's available at Amazon Books. Let me just, since I'm self-sponsored here, I might as well hold it up to the camera. There it is. The Satanic Conspiracy. It's available, as aforementioned, at Amazon Books. Check it out. Put it in the server. It's in, I think it was an interesting exercise, and my latest book should be out hopefully before Thanksgiving. It'll make a nice stocking stuffer, and that's going to be called Sociology for Conservatives. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. God bless you all.